Happy New Year. We are at the very end of 2025, which was a pretty productive year for us. When did we start doing this? May. Wow. Yeah, so this year we had a lot of progress both with the document. We finished up part one. That led us to the summer. We also did the a lot of automation stuff. So this was, the beginning of automating our scheduling on Twitch and Discord. And yeah, around June, I think we did the automation of the stream summaries, which might be what we're doing tomorrow. Tomorrow, I might try to get the summary of December in, and then do like a summary based on all of the months that we have. That might be cool. And then we could kind of like talk over things that happened, and maybe we can just have a Gemini conversation that people can suggest questions to ask it, like when was what stream was the most fun, like something like that, and see what it says. So after we finished part one, we made the abridged versions of it, the TLDR and the main takeaways. Then after that, we kind of chilled for a little bit. We played some games. We played some Hollow Knight Silksong. We played some Hades. But at that same time, we were working on getting ready for part two. But then we got Stunlocked, started working on, there we go, Silksong, August. Then we started working on content. That's what we started doing before we got Stunlocked. We were working on just making videos for the channel. Then we got Stunlocked, did a bunch of consciousness stuff. We went into Bernardo. Then once, I think around here, oh no, this is vid 2 prep. So we did consciousness video 1, I think like around here, Bernardo. Then we did consciousness video 2 in November. Q&A, yep, this is right when before we posted it. Then then holiday stuff starts coming in. We start thinking about next year. Yep, December was all about what makes you unique, and we kind of went into that, but we didn't really go into it too far. But we also determined that we're probably going to start with focus and attention and stuff before we go into what makes everyone unique. So it'll probably be something like attention, focus, motivation, then like the underlying physiology involved with that. So stuff like how emotions are involved in attention and motivation, emotion regulation, sleep, etc. Then we have to talk about biases and stuff. We got to talk about what is getting in the way of your ability to focus or do the things that you want to do. So it's not just about focus and attention. It's got to be about like intentionality in general, which I guess is a good way to go from part one. I think I'm reckoning with the fact that we should add more to part one or change things in part one rather than have all this stuff be in part two, especially as it relates to attention, consciousness, etc. So this leads us to here. We had our astrology day. That was pretty fun. We barely did networking brainstorm, but we had a yo Onion Helmet. What's good? Look like you're about to buy a business with that suit going on. Maybe we are. I saw the Ivan collab the other day. We're on the come up. Stay scheming. Much love. Hey, hell yeah. Much love as well. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. So I first saw that Ivan had followed like during the holiday break, and so I was curious about that. He did mention that someone pointed him my way or our way on his stream at one point. But yeah, that was kind of cool. Got to talk with him. I felt like chances are we would agree on like almost everything here except for maybe like semantics. And I think I I think like it felt like I was well equipped to make points about where where we actually where the rubber hit the road, where like I I I think the main thing is that I'm not comfortable with saying that our the framework that we arrive at in the document is a physicalist framework, even though it leverages our understanding of the physical world and the brain, etc. And I think I made an effective argument, even though it's not the best argument I could have made. I was kind of scrambling because I didn't know that he was coming in there, but I was trying to, think through it, but also communicate it. But yeah, I was able to offer stuff for him to think about, which is cool, and I hope that he watched the video, because that video I think is still perhaps some of the best stuff I've made in terms of densely packed content that's also accessible. Yeah. But yeah, once again, it's always the stream where I have to leave for something, which could be today because I'm dressed up for a party that I have to go to at 7. So perhaps something really exciting is going to happen today, or perhaps not. Perhaps we just get stuff done. So yeah, I didn't think I was going to stream today, but I thought, why not? New year, new stream tomorrow. I was hoping that maybe we would go over a stream summary of the entire last 6 months, like the months that we have summaries for, or that we have transcripts for, so we could throw that all into a single Gemini conversation and have some fun with that. Ask questions about. It was probably Filcher after I told him about Ivan. Oh, it was about Filcher, the user Filcher, after you told him about Ivan. Oh yeah, that could be it, right? Because wasn't that on this stream that we had that whole conversation about Ivan, and Filcher was new, and we were kind of given a rundown. Yeah, but we have to jump into attention stuff. We could have a little bit of fun tomorrow, and then we really should have fun on Friday. But we have to get into the nitty gritty of attention. Nice. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I guess that's how networking goes. I appreciate it. Am I going to drive 4 hours to New York? No, I'm not. I'm going to walk to a friend's apartment. So hopefully I get there safely. I'm going to be carrying Chick-fil-A nuggets, so you never know if I'm going to get robbed for that. All right, so I was following this really long Gemini conversation, or I did actually, we're not going to see how long this is. That's fun. But we have to go through this whole entire conversation at some point, probably, I don't know, tomorrow or next week. Because it's all really important stuff, and it involves stuff that we have to add to part 2, but it also is stuff that we have to change with part 1, because it's not like part 1 is not currently like when we talk about the science of our experience of meaning. I think we could do a little better, and it's slightly outdated, which is crazy to say because this is like really new stuff. But yeah. And then we have this extra document that comes from a different Gemini conversation I had that we're going to have to not go through. I think I put all the points here, but we're going to have to organize all this stuff maybe into an appendix in part 1, because this is stuff that's too in the weeds, but it's also really important that we have it down. Then we have to, I was thinking about just going through the outline of what we had for part 2 right now. So... real grown-up party going on. Got the suit out. Yeah, we always, for the past 5 years, we've done dress up completely. Go ham, just because, I need a reminder that I could even dress up. I don't dress up for anything else. Chick-fil-A logistics, yep. Dom is already 1 day ahead or something. Right, if Dom comes here, he's going to be already in the new year. Wow. That's pretty cool. We got to ask him what 2026 is like. Maybe it's like really different. All right, so then I ask, before we move on, can you comprehensively and extensively summarize? And I'm liking this extensively. Thank you for thank you for that suggestion once again. Summarize everything we've discussed so far in this entire conversation. Here's a comprehensive synthesis of the framework we have constructed together. This summary traces the arc of our conversation from evolutionary biology to computational neuroscience and into the frontiers of the philosophy of mind. So the first thing was dismantling the model, the triune brain model, which is what we've like kind of leveraged so far, and what I've also leveraged in my understanding of not only the brain but consciousness itself. So yeah, there's this idea that I had known was somewhat off, where we've got these like layers on the brain. We've got the lizard brain, then we got the mammalian brain that has like the limbic system and emotions, and then a human brain that has the neocortex and all like the higher cortical functionality. However, they're seeing that this is actually not quite right. And what clued them in on this is that we actually have like even our neocortex shares like neurons with very similar genetic codings to, even like other mammals, and I think even like lizards, or like even maybe insects. And really the differentiation or the differentiator between our brains is actually how long different developmental epochs take place in early development. So like for us, we actually have a significantly lengthy developmental arc of our like prefrontal cortex, or I shouldn't say that, like of the cortex, which lends itself to what actually comes out, which is the prefrontal cortex, all this complex stuff we've got going on. And it's really that our evolutionary trajectory led us in that direction, but we're still utilizing the same mechanisms that we share with all these other species. It's just that these I should just read I'm trying to exercise my own ability to remember these things, but for the sake of having it be clear, let's just read this. Evolution works via a common manufacturing plan. All vertebrates share the same developmental stages, but the duration of these stages differs. Right, so this actually makes it much more difficult for us to consider whether we share... Okay, I should just get to the implications for consciousness. Brains differ in size and architecture, but not in fundamental components. We share homologous neurons with rats and fish, but the wiring is baked differently. So when different parts of the brain have more or less time to develop, they start creating distinct structures. This is why like a medication can work on a rat but not on a human, even though a rat is a fairly good representation of a human brain for these types of tests. But the implications for consciousness is also huge. We cannot deny consciousness to animals based on missing structures. Like originally, I just thought, if the animal didn't have the limbic system, then it wouldn't be able to feel emotions. However, just because it doesn't have what we see as the limbic system, which is what we've identified as that part of the brain after it's developed for that much time, there might still be enough complexity with the neurons that share DNA with our limbic system, such that they still could experience something like emotion. And this is where Damasio was right all along. And I probably just misunderstood exactly what he was, either what he was saying, or perhaps he just didn't include like as comprehensive as a explanation as I got from Barrett's 7.5 Lessons About Consciousness. Is it Lisa Barrett? Lisa Feldman Barrett. 7.5 lessons about the brain, not about consciousness, about the brain. Since all brains regulate a body, allostasis, most brains likely experience affect, simple valence / arousal. So valence is like positive or negative. Arousal is like the amount, the magnitude, even if they lack the conceptual machinery for complex emotion. So this is where it's hard for us to intuit what would the difference between affect and emotion be. And you know, the only intuitive way we can think about this is like we can recognize that we experience multiple positive emotions and multiple negative emotions, and some emotions that are kind of in between. And so, you know, we can think about fear as like a distinct emotion from anxiety, and we can, you know, see those occurring in the brain. However, just because an animal or a species doesn't have fear, like as sophisticated of a fear circuit or anxiety circuit as we do, it still could feel affect in some sense. So this is why, and this is where the consciousness video holds up. Different species could experience consciousness in some sense, but it's very difficult for us to even consider what that even means, like what that type of conscious experience is like. So, all right, the mechanism of thought, embodied simulation. The question, how do we think? The answer, thinking is simulation. The brain runs the motor and sensory systems in idle. So this is this was from a discussion of how we have. So I should first say, like, you know, the brain's in this constant dialogue with the body, but then it's also got this predictive aspect of it where it doesn't even need signals from the body to feel like there's something happening in the body. And that's where, you know, predictive processing comes into play. And I was thinking, all right, well, if a lot of our conscious experience is made up by these signals, these bodily signals, whether they're actually from the body or from the brain, and it's always a both, right? It's always like top down priors, bottom up signals, or I don't know what the word is for that. Like you could say a resemblance of the actual reality, but really it's just signals coming together, and then there's some sort of logical mechanism that outputs. Yes, so I was considering, because there's so much of our conscious experience that is embodied and affective, like I was wondering if our thoughts are more abstract thinking, right? Like when we have linguistic thoughts in our head, whether that is actually afforded to us by let's just say our muscles, like in our you know, our mouth, our tongue, the stuff that allows us to say it, right? If those are activated, and that led to this idea that the muscles don't actually have to receive the signal, like the activation signal, for there to be some sort of simulation happening where, let's just say if my muscles were actually moving, there's something that's sensing whether or not those muscles are moving, and it would allow me to feel the movement of those muscles. But you could actually activate the in-between without actually activating the muscles themselves. And, you know, this is affected by top-down signals as well. So this is why this brings us to like the embodied cognition stuff, where it's like when I say grasp, that we know that parts of my brain that actually activate when I grasp things are activated. But it's not that I don't actually have to grasp with my muscles for that to take place. There's some intermittent, no, that wouldn't be the intermediary network in the brain that will activate for both of those cases. And that allows us to, you know, have very sophisticated simulations that can still contribute to our conscious experience. So All right, the as-if loop. You do not need to physically move to understand a concept. The brain sends an efference copy, a plan, to the sensory cortex and an inhibitory signal to the spinal cord. So it inhibits the spinal cord such that my muscles don't actually make those movements, but it still sends this copy to the sensory cortex such that those sensations can still happen and that those would contribute to my conscious experience. Neural reuse. We use the machinery of movement to perform abstract thought. This is something people have found. And you know, the embodied cognition people will show you how they'll point out how we use metaphors all the time when we're like reading through a book or we're going to the next step. You know, what this means in terms of both, you know, pointing out the actual like spatial aspect of what those phrases imply, but then also pointing out the simulation that happens when we do think through those things. And that leads us to the, I got to figure out how this is pronounced, the entorhinal. I don't know. We gotta figure it out. Entorhinal. I think I'm going to just take that one. I know it's AI, but entorhinal. All right, entorhinal. This part of the brain deals with like spatial navigation. And what people have found is that this part of the brain is also used for concepts. So like when we're thinking about conceptual things and you know, we've already talked about relationships between concepts. Well, this part of the brain seemingly allows us to have spatial relationships with between different concepts. So, you know, in the cases of like higher ups, you know, in terms of social settings, you can we see that it actually is leveraged for that type of conceptual understanding. Now that one's pretty direct and obvious. The question is like, you know, how would I think I used the example of a pencil versus a pen. Like there would be some you know, relationship between those, and the question is like how much does that relationship require the entorhinal cortex, and what else would be involved with that? All right, the limit. We moved from strong embodiment requires muscles twitch to weak embodiment requires neural representation of movement, right? So there's just representation of movement that allows us to do that. But yeah, like when we think about linguistic stuff, I guess I got to remember what was actually said there. Is it the case that the signals that, you know, usually read, you know, mouth movements and stuff like that, and it's a lot more than that, right? When we're thinking about even just, you know, when I think about a pen, obviously there's that like linguistic aspect to it, but then there's also like the affective part of it. It's not that like you know, a pen is that salient to me in the sense that it'll like bring out a lot of emotion when I think about it, but there's still that aspect of salience. You know, I've always talked about salience in relation, or salience, affect, and emotion in relation to our experience of certainty itself. Like, why does it seem so self-evident that this is a pen? And that experience is afforded by our affective mechanisms. So, okay, so then we get to this, the architecture of concepts, the grid and the map, the discovery. We linked the neural reuse hypothesis to the entorhinal cortex and grid cells, the cognitive. So another discussion that brought me here was we were talking about, Dom had posted a video of Dr. K saying that thoughts are not in the brain, and I took umbrage. Is that the way you'd say it? I took umbrage with that because I could have sworn that we could do that because I remembered reading about this type of thing. So this is the way I would make if I were to get stun locked and make a video specifically, you know, responding to Dr. K. This is how I would do it. The cognitive map. The brain uses the same hardware used for spatial navigation to map abstract concepts. So the neocortex stores the content, sensory details, and then the entorhinal cortex stores the metric, the coordinate system. So, imagine the memory is dealt with, or the neocortex deals with the memory. When you're leveraging a concept, you're getting signals from the neocortex that gets to the entorhinal cortex, leverages that space, so that coordinate system, to create aspects of the experience that we end up having of the concept itself. So the question is, where was that concept, right? When we think about a concept, like, what does it mean for that to be the content of the concept, and then this to be like the metric? Like, when we intuitively think about the concepts that we experience, the meaning we experience, like when I think that this is a pen, both of these are involved. We can't discount either one of these. It's not like the neocortex, like we could say theoretically that everything was there, but it needed the entorhinal cortex to manifest. But really, the signals required both of those stages. And that's how all this stuff works. Context dependence. The map is not static. The PFC drives global remapping or creates ad hoc manifolds, effectively creating a temporary coordinate system for the specific task at hand. For example, comparing pencil and sun on the axis of yellowness. So, yeah, like I was trying to think about how this part of the brain might be utilized differently for a pencil versus a pen, versus a pencil and a pen versus a pencil and the sun. Like, each of these have a connection of some sort. Pencil and pen are both writing utensils. Pencil and sun are both yellow. And so how would this type of cortex be leveraged for each of these? And obviously we don't, we don't know exactly. We'd have to figure that one out. But the point is, it's not like content has like a location on this map, and it's like absolute location, and it moves around a little bit as time goes on. That's not how that works. It's, what determines how it's represented on the map does come from the neocortex. You could say, like, that would be a theoretical interpretation of what's happening here. But then it's once it gets to the entorhinal cortex, it's, being represented in that space, that state space, you could say. Really, we could talk about these things as state space at every point. And also, it's never as simple as a sequence from one part of the brain to the other and then to the next thing. It's always this dynamic communication or dynamic network between many parts. We do have to go over some of that 7.5 lessons about the brain, because that also provides a lot of really cool stuff that we should be talking about, should be acknowledging in the document. It has a really great image of hubs. So, like, imagine in the brain that we've talked about hubs before, and this book leverages a nice analogy between airports, where certain airports act more like a hub for longer distance flights than others. Like when you have to fly across the world, you usually have to go somewhere that is the hub, and then that hub takes you all the way across the ocean. It's not like every airport does that across the ocean flight. So there's some efficiency in how that's set up, where all airports don't have to fly to every other airport, which would create like many more connections. But our brain has limited resources, so it needs to manage efficiency in that way, or at least that's the the evolutionary story. Okay. And then, so obviously, like, context dependent, a bunch of different things that could be going on and in the moment, your mood, context, your memories, something happening in the moment. This can all affect how these signals are represented in the entorhinal cortex, as well as how they're, how these signals end up being represented in many parts of the brain, affective, linguistic, etc. The operating system, predictive processing, and allostasis. So I'm getting into, I think, a more general view of this entire system. The brain is a prediction machine, not a reactor. We already know this stuff. Top-down flow, simulate. So this is a generalized interpretation of what's going on with predictive processing. Top-down flow, simulation, prediction flows from deep layers to sensory layers. It creates the experience, and the eyes, ears just check for errors. So this actually, like a predictive processing, a strictly predictive processing interpretation actually views top-down priors as prediction and then bottom-up signals as error to what you're predicting. And that error is what facilitates change if it is significant enough. The feeling of truth. We established affective realism, which I have to look into because this is exactly what I'm trying to point out, where powerful internal feelings are experienced as objective truths about the world, making you believe I feel it, therefore it is real, blurring the line between your emotion and external reality, influencing perception. So yeah, who's all about this? We gotta find that one out, because that's the type of story we tell. That's the type of story that I think our science points us towards. Low prediction error equals metabolic efficiency, feeling of rightness or certainty. Of course, this is a much more complicated equation, but like this predictive processing, prediction error interpretation is just a perspective you could have on this, on what's happening here. High prediction error equals metabolic cost, feeling of agitation or wrongness. So this is something that we know for certain, like when you're feeling like something is wrong, or if you feel like there's cognitive dissonance with some information, that is an affective experience. And yeah, there's a lot to that. We see it in the brain. All right, the origin of cost. The brain doesn't know money. It doesn't know like resource amounts like in like some abstract way. Like, you know, a game that you play, a resource management game, will always tell you what the resource is, but it's not like the body has like a counter somewhere, except for actual matter or molecules or whatnot. But it's not like there's like a singular counter. It's a lot. It's you know, once again, this is an analog system where there's a lot of you know, messy counters, you could say, that are all happening in conjunction with each other and changing. Brain doesn't know money. It knows interoception. Cost is a prediction of deviations from homeostatic set points, glucose, oxygen, safety. Certain parts of the brain are by like how they're structured, the type of mechanisms involved in the behavior that they show. We see that these parts of the brain are concerned with, and that's like our interpretation of it, concerned with these types of things, such that if there was low oxygen, it would send signals. Like that's how this type of thing works. It's set up in such a way, in an analog way, where if it's not feeling the requisite amount, or it's getting too much of something, it will send signals to other parts of the brain that will then cascade into something that, you know, grabs your attention or makes you think that I'm hungry or whatnot. All right, the control system, errors, salience, and gating. The dynamics, we move from static signals to transient attractors. So I mentioned this because this is just something I got from the consciousness research, that when we think about these signals from one part of the brain to the other, it's not just like a singular, like I sent a signal and that was it. A lot of times when we think about signals, we think about like these singular dumps. So like when I refresh this page, you know, I'm getting some dump of information. When I watch a YouTube video, I'm getting like a stream of information, but like that stream is like, you know, you can imagine that it's somewhat singular. Each part of the stream is coming to me once, but that's not quite how the brain works when we think about signals, or when we point out signals. There are states that will what's good, Darmadam? What up? How is the new year? We were talking about that like 20 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago. How was 2026? Is it much different? Is it quite different than Ask AI about the Dharma theory, that online thing is experienced at a time and the mind weaves it together. I know it from Burma technique stuff. All right. Only okay. Wait. Let's try to get this. That one thing is experienced at a time, and the mind weaves it together. So, yeah, this is a question about consciousness, in a sense. When I'm talking about signals in the brain, I'm talking about most generally with the nervous system, how signals are sent. Well, like obviously, the most granular way we can look at is a a neurotransmitter going from a cell to a cell, and we can think about all the dynamics that are involved and whether or not a neuron actually fires or not, and all that. But yeah, once we zoom out a little bit, then we see a lot of neurons in like a state space, being more prone to activate, and that creates like a more persistent signal. So really, we're just thinking about different levels of perspective, or different perspectives that we can look at what's happening in the brain. But when we're thinking about like concrete information going from one part of the brain to the other, we can't think about that as just like a send. It's like it create, or what's involved usually is a persistent state, not too persistent. It's ephemeral. It's transient. A stable state, attractor that persists over time. So this is like where the signal's going. The error is sensory energy that disrupts the attractor. So if there's enough error, there's parts of the brain that will say, hey, we got to stop that signal in its tracks. And then that state space, has to be used for something else. And then there's all kinds of dynamics where like a certain signal won't be activated again, or it's less likely to be activated again, and yeah. But yeah, this could be a discussion about a specific aspect of consciousness, where it's it might feel a certain way, or even like when we think about what's being added to the global neuronal workspace. You might think that only one thing is changing at a time. However, with the global neuronal workspace, it is the case that like ignitions that are, let's just say, these things that are adding information to the global workspace, right? Whatever's adding information to our consciousness in the moment can happen at any, like it doesn't happen at regular intervals. It's really based on how what's the way to say this? How much those signals are being fired locally, and then if they're fired locally enough, they fire globally, and that can obviously cause different signals being added to the global space. But we could always look at also the waves that are involved in our global processing, that is having this signal go to all these other parts of the brain, and that has a consistent frequency. All right, but yeah, even that story doesn't point out a single thing being experienced at a time. Technically, I mean, it kind of is. You could think about it in that way, but it depends what one thing is. Like this one thing becomes less clear. When I think about what is one thing in my conscious experience, this is why, this is why it was really important for our consciousness. I don't even know how to find this thing. Our consciousness part 2, for us to point out what the atom of experience would actually be. the atom of conscious experience. Like the atom of conscious experience is essentially this one thing, and we pointed out that it's actually very difficult to figure out what this one thing would even be. All right, I'm sorry, I'm not even responding to things. I know it from Burma technique stuff. Sorry, only one thing. I'm sorry, that only one thing is experienced at a time. Yeah, the idea that only one thing doesn't seem to be commensurate with what we know about the brain. I'm chilling, bro. We will probably nap soon. Hell yeah. First nap of 2026? From the sheer power to access 2026. All of us plebs gotta wait and learn. Gotcha. This is super related to my practice. Oh, you know what? Now that you mention this, I haven't meditated today, so I'm gonna stop 15 minutes before 7, meditate, and then bounce. So I appreciate you talking about the sheer power of meditation. All of us plebs gotta wait and learn. Gotcha. Super related to my practice. My experience will flicker super fast. Right. Obviously, this stuff feels like it flickers super fast, but as we pointed out, like most directly here, I say the brain is not like a movie. We can't think about consciousness as if it's a movie. It's not a discrete sequence of low-dimensional frames, nor a computer processing step-by-step code. Its information isn't stored in binary bits, but in ever-shifting relationships, in how the timing and strength of signals evolve together, shaped by all sorts of dynamics that are far too in the weeds for this video. Because you could think of, like, when we're talking about the global, both the global workspace and also like local networks of the brain, you know, even though I just described signals as these persistent attractor states, that doesn't mean those those states are the exact same neurons firing every single time. There's still, like, this is a very messy continuous system where you know you're dealing with a lot of dynamics, a lot of things that are changing very subtly over time. For our experience's sake, like, it's not noticeable, it's very subtle. But it's there. These are changes that are happening, that are affecting our experience in unnoticeable ways. Like a unique chunk of sense data, right? Yeah. Meditate at the party as a conversation starter. That would be pretty neat. That would probably weird people out. That would sour the night for some people. I can give more of the theory if you want. It's not X. It's X, not X. Is there again? I can't follow that one. Definitely, they say you experience it like frames, but you are just noticing a coarse version of the frames that are really 10 times. Well, it's not even 10 times faster. Like, we're dealing with something that's continuous. It's the difference between a 1 trillion and infinity. It's the difference between 200 quintillion versus infinity. But you could always point out that there's a discrete amount of electrons in the space, so it's technically not infinite, right? It's like, technically there is probably some level between, it's effectively continuous, but because of the amount of electrons that are in this space, or in the universe, you could even just say that if you harp on the the fact that electrons are what's the word? Quantum. What's the word when two things become entangled? Quantum entanglement. You could say, electrons are entangled with other electrons, so you have to care about those other electrons. Regardless, there's still seemingly, and I don't know if they've confirmed this, a discrete amount of electrons in the universe. Thus, you could say that technically our brains are not exactly continuous. But for this conversation, they're effectively continuous. And what do I mean by continuous? I mean continuous just like if I said like a continuous graph example. Yeah. Is an unbroken line or curve that cannot be drawn without lifting your pencil. So the example is, let's just say the system for this system, like let's just say there's this graph for this system to get to, I don't know, to this point. Let's just say, I don't know if this is the best way to describe this, but let's do it. For this point here at -2, 0, to get to this point, 0, 2, it must pass through this point, it must pass through all these points. But these aren't a discrete set of points. This is a continuous line. It will hit every single number. And the thing is, like, there is an infinite set of numbers in between 0 and 2 and -2 and 0. So it's hitting an infinite set of numbers, or an infinite array of numbers here. That's what I mean by continuous, and I'm just pointing out that, because there's a discrete set of electrons in the universe, that technically it's not actually continuous, but that's like a ridiculous thing to talk about in this conversation. It's actually, effectively, or I should say it's effectively continuous. It's not a discrete sequence of low-dimensional frames, blah, blah, blah. Instead, we can think about the brain as an analog system, and an analog system change is continuous rather than discrete. There isn't a fixed number of possible states. There's an effectively infinite range of possibilities, just like there's an infinite set of numbers between 0 and 1. Okay, an analog system, this was a B-roll thing, is a system that represents and processes information using a continuous range of values rather than discrete, separate steps. Think of a light dimmer switch that smoothly brightens or dims, or the volume knob on an old radio. A simple example of an analog system is sound. When you pluck a guitar string, it doesn't jump between preset notes. The vibration of the string can take on any frequency within a continuous range. Each possible frequency is just one of infinitely many along a smooth spectrum, which is why we need to tune the guitar. The brain works in much the same way. Its activity doesn't move in stepwise jumps, but flows through a vast high-dimensional space of possible configurations. As different neural systems broadcast, synchronize, and fade, the global workspace shifts its shape continuously, never quite repeating, never exactly the same, from moment to moment, from second to second, from millisecond to millisecond. You could get as granular as you want in that. I apologize. I gotta actually read the theory here. I'd say the awareness is continuous, but you can definitely notice discrete chunks of sense data trading. Right, but you're like, at that point you are interpreting abstractions. It's not that the actual sense data in the brain is chunks. It's that we're now interpreting that as chunks. It's something that, it's something that you have to apply, some pattern recognition that you have to apply to what you're experiencing. So yeah, once again, like when I'm describing these things, like there's a difference between like what's actually happening in the brain and what we can deal with our conscious experience of things. This is why, we always have this, like, just because, the brain might be deterministic, that doesn't mean that we, can act as if our understanding of free will isn't something that we can leverage. And that's like the whole point of what I'm going to try to do in part 2 with our attention. Like, how do we leverage our attention, and what does that mean, and whatnot. Trading off in pairs with a cognizing of that object if your awareness becomes precise enough. This perception shows up in a lot of meditative traditions. Feel free to check with AI. And you can totally say that's just perception, not really what's happening, but that is still what gets perceived as you refine your perception. Right. Yeah. So like, for the sake of, am I going? Oh, we're back. For the sake of meditation practices, for the sake of our conceptual understanding, for the sake of what is practical, we can think about discrete chunks. That's totally fine. I'm just pointing out that, like, what's really happening underneath the hood is certainly not discrete. And again, yeah, it depends on what you mean, but continuity and what is continuous, right? Yes, I'm sorry. I keep yapping. I would say it the other way around. When this is actually pretty. Out of curiosity, what was the thing I just said? I don't remember. Sense data appears continuous but is discrete when you can perceive it clearly enough. Yeah, the issue is like what you mean by appears continuous, because like I'm talking in the realm of what science allows us to say in that space, and like it doesn't allow us to say that it merely appears continuous. Like what this isn't a topic about like I'll always say that ontology, the source of ontology, is our conscious experience. But when we're talking about the physical world or science and stuff like that, and we're explaining what the brain is doing and that how that's affecting our experience, I can't say the other. I have to say that sense data is actually, and it depends what we mean by sense data, but signals in our brain are continuous. If we define sense data as something perceived in consciousness, then we can start saying it can feel continuous or discrete. But I actually couldn't say that it's one or the other. Like once we're in the conceptual, in the conceptual space, the realm of consciousness, then how we interpret things can be either way based on what you learn, effectively. For that topic. And for, I think, perhaps every topic. Sense data appears continuous. Okay, I should have said perception, not data. Perception data. Perception data appears continuous, but is discrete. So that's where I would say that you could go both ways, and you're neither wrong or right. I would say certain practices or certain cultures lead you in one way, like it's essentially teaching you a way to think about things that can be beneficial, but it's not like that way of thinking about it is correct. You could easily think about your perception data being continuous or discrete, even when you perceive it clearly enough. It's kind of how you train your mind to think. I'm always talking the subjective perception. Yeah, perceiving data. Yeah, my bad. Do you think meditation allows you to experience consciousness in more detail? It's like, this is a difficult question to ask. It would depend what we mean by experience consciousness in more detail. And I could go in that direction, and I could say that when we say consciousness in more detail, it allows you to notice subtle changes in your conscious, to aspects of your conscious state, whether that is like changes of affect, of emotion, changes of your mind's thoughts, changes of even interoceptive signals, like your conscious perception of the signals of your heartbeat, of your breathing, etc. I would say that that meditation allows you, like, builds a skill where you can actually perceive these changes more granularly. But to say that it's like that is a description of in more detail in some absolute sense would be inappropriate. I can pick holes in that, but it's okay. I just ask because that seems to be the difference. All right, I'm not sure how to interpret that, but I think well, you could think that also like a good example of this is like people describe that once you meditate, things are actually more clear, and you could describe clear as actually a description of how much detail is there. You could say that a clear mind actually is missing a lot of the detail that a chaotic mind would have. Like, this is just why there's semantics at play here. So, but who decides what in more detail means? Whether it means the unskilled the unskilled mind or the meditated mind or the skilled meditator mind. It's down to semantics, you know. So, but yeah, so imagine that you are experiencing. You gave an outline of meditation that I can pick holes in, but I am implying that I think it's possible to the mechanics of consciousness more clearly. To experience the mechanics of consciousness more clearly. Right. I should point out that like the way that our brain works, I think, is that it's good with pattern recognition. That's all it can perceive in some sense, such that, you know, this is, you know, in that same way, this is why you can get rid of suffering by like, you know, by not finding a pattern with it, or by not, I don't know, indulging in what the thing means, what the pain might mean. Like you separate what the pain usually means from what it actually is, like the signal that it actually is. And that allows you to, you know, not experience that pain, that suffering. And so what I'm getting at is like what you're doing here is you're recognizing pattern, you're recognizing the difference between states. So you can notice the, you know, the difference, and then you can notice when you're in a certain state. But at none of these cases are you actually finding some fundamental aspect of reality or consciousness. This is like the whole point about the ontological takeaway of the meaning we experience, explicit or acted out, is functionally caused by the coordination of our memory, salience, affective, and autonomic systems. Introspection itself is a process within that workspace, within the workspace. Our linguistic, affective, and conceptual systems contribute to interpretation of external and internal stimuli, as well as consciousness itself. So once you come away with a takeaway that, you know, consciousness is discrete or continuous, you've already fallen to some interpretive framework that's leveraging these parts of the brain. The result is fundamentally subjective, even though, as we mentioned, our experience of the world feels certain. To me, this is just misunderstanding the two truths. I agree nothing can ultimately be said about the nature of consciousness, but it doesn't mean we can't speak on the relative level of concepts. You misrepresent my view, by the way, but we are two ships in the night here. I apologize for that. Yeah, the way I think like I had made previous connections between Heidegger's phenomenology of truth and the two truths that we've talked about, and there's this acknowledgement of this idea of, you know, some undescribable truth in here, and Heidegger has the humility or wisdom to explain or to make clear that his own ontological work is a hermeneutic phenomenology, explicitly expressing the idea that phenomenology itself is not a neutral observation of phenomena, but an interpretive, self-reflective inquiry into the meaning of being, where interpretation and appearance are inseparable. So even when Heidegger makes like a description of a fundamental characteristic of consciousness or of Dasein, it's through some interpretive lens. It's not ever correct in some fundamental way. So this is all just to say, this is just going back to like the linguistic pragmatic roots here, where it's like when we talk about consciousness being discrete or continuous, we can argue for both of those ways. There cannot be, because of the two truths, because of the nature of you know, the capital T truth, we aren't allowed to say that one of those is even is correct or right or wrong, right? We can't say that one of those is wrong in some sense, you know. Right, but you are mapping Heidegger onto my Buddhist framing and conflating them. I probably am. Right, I'm trying to just draw the analogy, but I'm probably failing. But if that's your framing, that's fine. Sorry. Yes, it is a meaningless question, in my opinion. If you want an ultimate answer, none exists. Right. So I guess bringing this back, my concern is that when you start talking about our perception of consciousness being discrete in nature or in reality, that might imply something about the actual underlying physical processes that we ought not imply. Oh, right, but that's not my view. Okay, sorry. All right, I should just read this theory. So perhaps I'm just making an argument, a pragmatic argument against this theory. The theory of momentariness it is a core tenet of the Abhidharma schools, the higher teachings, and was further refined by these other schools. The theory posits that what we experience as a fluid, continuous reality is actually a rapid succession of discrete, microscopic moments of consciousness, much like the frames of a movie film. Okay, so this is exactly what I described, that we're not allowed to actually talk about our perception as... so yeah, you know what? This is actually I make a stronger argument. Even though the underlying mechanisms are different in theory from our perception, I think that the underlying science tells us that we're not even allowed to, that we shouldn't think of our perception of things as discrete in some fundamental way. Like, I know from the science that even if I were to think that things are discrete in a microscopic way, that I know I'm wrong because of what the science says. The whole point is that the science that underlies our consciousness, which hasn't been like proven, but is very strongly implied. It tells us how we can think about our own conscious experience, how we can think about our own perception, such that I can notice that even though I look at this pen and I think that this pen is something that's unchanging over time, that I know for a fact that my brain is actually changing in ways such that the activation that is happening while I keep focus on this pen is actually making it such that my perception of this pen is actually different at each moment. That's kind of the takeaway of part one here. It's to point out that there is this change and that this change is continuous. And then the question is like, let's just say even if we kept that in mind, what benefit would we get from thinking about the world as discrete, or not the world, but our perception of the world as discrete? And that, perhaps there is some benefit, but there is a benefit in the sense that once you get to certain levels of abstraction, you can think about today and tomorrow as two discrete things. You can think about yourself in this moment as discrete and separate from how you're going to be in the next moment after you think about something. You could think about these things in discrete. Sorry about that. Was saying sense data is experienced in discrete chunks when perception is refined to a... So what the brain tells us is that no level of refinement can make our perception be discrete. No, not even for the most practiced yogis. We know from the science has authority here over how we experience the world. We know what happens when those yogis get to that point. We know that significant changes are happening in the brain, but the activation of those systems are still continuous, and not only the activation, but the other parts of the dynamics, the neuromodulators that are being released and the connections that are being strengthened and taken away, and the transmission of all kinds of things, both from neuron to neuron, but from within the fluid of the brain. There's so much stuff. Obviously, the body is also similarly continuous in that it's an analog system where we've got stuff going through the blood that gets to the the hypothalamus, and that leads to all kinds of stuff. So, but anyway, I'm happy for that to be interpreted however you want. But I'm saying you go deep into meditation. There comes a point when sense data is experienced in discrete chunks. Okay, I see. So I guess, yeah, my hypothesis, or not my hypothesis, but my question is, my thing that I'm wondering is, let's just say you went real deep into a mindfulness practice, but you kept the information that your sense data is continuous. Would you then still ever experience the world as discrete? And my hypothesis is that if you kept that fact in mind and you kept the drive that allows you to believe in it, right? This is like the understanding of the power of the scientific method and what it tells us. If you kept that in mind as you did your mindfulness practice, would you still get to a place where you felt comfortable believing that consciousness is discrete in those states of being able to pick out minute changes as they happen? Like, if you understood the brain correctly, or not correctly, but aptly enough, you would know that even though it feels as though you experience these things in a discrete way, that, really reality, even as you're experiencing it in those moments, are not actually discrete in a more fundamental level. Like, there are subtle changes that even then you wouldn't notice, because we can't meditate. Like, we can't build a powerful enough meditation skill to notice every single change that happens in the brain. We can notice significant changes, obviously. Like, we can notice when what would otherwise be quite subtle, we can notice when that stuff happens. But we know the brain to be way more complicated than we could ever notice it to be, even after a lifetime of significant training. I'm sorry. Disagree with a lot of that, but feel free to explore it with AI. Do Burmese meditators report experiencing their senses in discrete chunks? I'm gonna throw that in there. I should read more of what we just had, though. I always find it funny when the people who have spent the most time studying and strengthening their consciousness are somehow the most likely to be somehow fabricating everything and profoundly deluded. Right. Well, that could literally be because they are training a way of thinking. They are deeply internalizing a specific way of thinking. So if, the question is, what does it mean for them to be deluded? And perhaps it's simply the fact that they learned something too much. But obviously we have to know things in general. This is like the point of there's always some presupposition to how we perceive the world. There has to be. Feel free to explore your thinking, but you're not connecting to anything I'm saying. Yeah, I apologize. I think what was said here is that people have noticed that after they have followed a meditation practice for a long period of time, that they believed their sense data to be discrete. Like that's what I'm thinking is happening. Or that's what I think that you're telling me. Right. And yeah, I'm saying we still ought not listen to that person about some absolute ontological truth about consciousness. Similar to how any conceptualization we have, even about consciousness itself, is fundamentally speculative and contingent, even for the practiced yogi. So even though they believe that they experience it as discrete frames of a movie, we know that what is happening in their brain is continuous and that it would actually affect their conscious experience in a way that would be still subtly continuous. But for them, they have built the ability to notice very minute changes in the physiology of their brain and body, yet they're not actually experiencing the brain as discrete, even though they believe they are. But what I'm saying, what people report experientially, who has the dogma and who is unmovable here? Who has the dogma and is unmovable here? Between me and so this is where it's like, yeah, how do we determine what to think at all? This is where we get to here. That naturally, if all our convictions are contingent brain states, why should we privilege the conviction we have for the scientific physicalist framework over any other? And the pragmatic answer, so we don't have like a surefire way of doing this, but I make the argument that we do have a discernible heuristic of we can trust the specific conviction that arises when a framework compellingly communicates its own alignment with our internalized standards for logic and evidence. So this is where we take hold of this is kind of a faith, right? We're taking faith in our understanding of the history and trajectory and the utility of empirical science. I believe that empirical science has led to the significant transformations that have happened in the last 500 years. Like, I believe that. That's just something I believe. And so I'm leveraging that belief that empirical science actually gives us the most pragmatically accurate, I can't say accurate in some ontological sense, but pragmatically accurate, such that it's something that we could share. Like, this is like the type of takeaway that we can easily communicate and share because it's empirical and it can be tested for multiple people. Like, we're taking these standards of empirical science and we're saying this can be our heuristic. We have no other heuristic. You know, we know that the conviction that we feel when we think about what is true in the world is not good enough, because we often think that we often think that something is true that ends up turning out to be false for ourselves, right? We end up thinking that something is false that we previously thought was true. We cannot trust our conviction. The yogi should not trust his own conviction or her own conviction that experience is discrete, no matter how certain that feels. That's kind of the argument I'm making. So perhaps they would argue that that's their heuristic. Their heuristic is the wisdom that they earned, and that's fine. It's just that for us, for me here, for like where I'm trying to just take in all the information and see where it brings us, and it seems like the most effective heuristic we could possibly have is the standards of empirical science and logic. Not what this has already given us, right? It's not that the physical world is the standard. It's the standards of empirical science that have given us the physical world. But by that very own standard, it tells us that our understanding of the physical world is probably wrong in significant ways. And, we have to just wait until we figure those ways out. Funny, in certain discussions, it seems like a small difference, like discrete versus continuous, but then you explore it and the difference emerges from some hugely different opinions that really don't change in one conversation. By the way, I think consciousness is continuous, just that sense data is discrete. Right? I mean, this is just one of those things where, like, from everything discussed up until this point in this script, even the stuff that is, even the networks that are closest to our sense, what we intuit as sense data when we experience it, even those parts of the brain are fundamentally continuous. That's where I'm arriving at this firm position of I'm not allowed to think that my experience of sense data is ever discrete, no matter how much meditation I've put in, and no matter how much it feels like it is. why take a firm position? Yeah, the only argument I can make for why take a firm position here is that I think that when you start using it always goes down to the linguistic pragmatism, or I don't know if that's how to say it. If I were to say that I believed that sense data was discrete, that then I could imply to someone could infer from that the underlying physiology and dynamics is such that it's like that's discrete. The problem for me is just that I think that when we use these words that are so ambiguous and weighted, that it can cause someone to infer something that I don't want them to infer from it. So I think it's really important that we understand how the brain works at the physical level. So that's why I'm not going to use words about our perception like that. But if we're going to talk about if we're going to talk in the once again, we can always just be more precise. So if we're talking pragmatically, and you want to know what the benefit of mindfulness practices is, I would tell them that you can get to a point where you can seemingly notice everything that happens in your brain in discrete, noticeable chunks. Like, that would be a way I would say that, because that gives all the power that I think that we want out of this. It's that it's possible to get to such a state of mind from and it's not like you bring yourself to this state of mind through one exercise. You're affecting the trajectory of your brain connections over time, and you're internalizing things. You're learning. You're getting better at noticing things because parts of your brain are actually changing, and in such a way that it can, disinhibit the parts of your brain that would otherwise try to throw a bunch of noise into the mix. You can get to this point where you have insane power over your ability to notice when things happen in your brain, and you can notice them as clear, discrete events that you can understand and simply just acknowledge, or you can act upon them. And that's actually a huge deal for what we're trying to talk about in part 2. Like, I have to include mindfulness training as a significant skill for your ability to take hold of your life. Because, this isn't just something where it's like, it allows you to, not experience suffering and whatnot, but it allows you to notice things. It allows you to notice when you're getting taken hold by a bias of some sort. It allows you to notice when addiction is trying to grab you. It allows you to notice when your beliefs are changing in a subtle way. It's such a powerful skill that I have to talk about it, perhaps extensively. Okay. But you have the AI right there explaining exactly what is being described phenomenologically. I'm sorry. Okay. I will read that in a second, and then I should actually get off right now. But I could always go to that thing slightly late. After this whole discussion, meditation takes priority over the party. To disambiguate. Yep, very fair. Right. Yes. So I mean, there's always just concern, especially as a content creator, that a literal influencer, that I just need to always try to be as precise as possible with my speech, and I fail at that all the time. And perhaps even the things that I think are most important for me to be precise about aren't the things that I should be precise about, and I'm being careless on something else. But I have to go based on my own conceptual understanding of what is precarious to make ambiguous. I mean, I think it is actually like that, but the only real point I was making is that a meditation level that is what is experienced and very sane and appropriate to not conclude things based off meditators, but what they report is very valuable. Right. Um, yeah, if I were to make this point in a very simplistic way, I think that knowing what we know about the brain and about what we know about the two truths and all that, and what we know from philosophy, especially these linguistic pragmatists, the yogi who's who undergoes a lot of training should only feel allowed to say what people could experience, what they could think about their conscious experience. That it would be inappropriate for them to tell anyone about what the truth actually is, but to tell them how they can interpret the world or how they can think about these things. Unless, of course, they say things in a very precise way that it explains exactly what they're trying to say. If they ever were to have a teaching, it needs to be either precise or it needs to be contingent or contingent in the sense of like it can be this way. You can do it. You can think about your experiences this way. This is a possible way you can get. You can bring your mind to experience the world in this type of way. I think that's. I mean, this is just This is obviously this isn't a prescription that I'm like enforcing onto the world or that I believe that everyone ought to like follow in some absolute sense. But it's something that I try to promote. Should I disclose that I experience my senses as discrete chunks when I meditate? That's fine. The point I'm trying to make is that you ought to be careful when telling people whether or not that is a true representation of reality, or like that is some absolute description of reality. Now, you can be as precise as saying, when I meditate, I feel like my sense data is discrete. But that would be very different from saying that because I've meditated, I see that my sense data is discrete. Those things can imply two very different things to someone. And so you have to just be very careful with your speech about what you could imply, and make sure to not say something that could imply something that would imply more than what you would like. Likewise the other way. All right. I think that was a great discussion. I apologize if it seemed a little too too strong. Maybe it's the suit. I'm feeling ready for a political speech or something. But I think that was actually really beneficial for us to discuss. Yeah, no, great chat. Great way to start off the new year and end off the new year. And we will continue on the attention takeaways. I'm actually probably going to just start with the beginning of this whole conversation, which goes way back, and it's referring to stuff from the. Maybe we should actually go through the notes from the first 2.5 lessons from 7.5 lessons about the brain, the book, and then get into it, all that stuff, and then. Yeah, I think a lot of what comes up next is organizing content in this section and figuring out how we want to tell the story. What did I have right now? Okay, yeah, so this is I think how we might want to go about it, which is different than what I originally had, but based on what I've been seeing, like this is like the type of story we need to tell, like what we know about our experience of directing attention, what we've called reflection, deliberate reflection, And what did we say? There was like a self-conscious, deliberate reflection. So this is like when you actually think about reflecting in the so like there's deliberate reflection where it's like someone actually, you know what, it's very difficult to figure out what the difference is between these two, but I guess it's like yeah, if you were to think like, oh, I should look at this thing right now, but you don't think about that, you're thinking about it, that would be something like deliberate reflection. But then self-conscious deliberate reflection is like, oh, I notice that I am doing this thing and I'm thinking about this. And it's really effective to have this self-conscious, deliberate self-conscious reflection. I forget how I say it in part 1, because then you can think of like, oh, in these moments I can, you know, this is like mindfulness. I can reflect in the moment, and that's really important. It's good to have the very concept of reflection as something you can do. So anyway, what we want to talk about is what happens with our experience and underlying mechanisms when we direct our attention in that way, and like what is actually what is actually yeah, you know, it's kind of the same thing to say, like, what is that attention direction? Because, you know, we often think about top-down signals as just like originating from nowhere land, you know, from us. But really, like, these are you know, what we believe that we are like, when I believe that I'm directing my attention, I'm really just getting a manifestation of consciousness, while a bunch of top-down signals that are unconscious are taking place. So still though, like in our you know, conceptual unprivileged perspective, that's all we have. We just have this conscious conceptual view of the world. How this affects our focus over time, so like how we can, you know, make up the story, you know, the self-conscious story of focusing on something, what that does, how we can leverage focus to frame the situation. So I think these are kind of the same things, so we have to figure that out, which affects top-down priors and ultimately the rest of the system. So yeah, this early on, I think it's important that we consider what framing, even in the moment, does to us. So like when we think about a situation, or a very simple situation, you know, in a certain lens, like let's just imagine a first-time meditator is given the instructions from Sam Harris to pay attention to thoughts arising. Them just having that little bit of top-down influences how their subsequent experience manifests, such that they notice these discrete thoughts arising. How can we leverage focus to affect our brain's long-term internalizing conceptualization, right? How we can like literally internalize a specific framing, and then brought in a broader sense, broader structural changes from mindfulness practices, like how our specific focus can do things that are largely unconscious to us over the long period of time, but do affect what becomes conscious to us, such as a lot of the mindfulness stuff that we mentioned. So this is all stuff that needs to be in like a focused discussion. But then I have to look at all that what do we have here? Like what's going on with the will versus the way? I got to look into that, figure out if that's just some like you know, that's probably just some interpretation, some perspective on top, layered on top of what we've already just talked about. Yeah, it's important to talk about like this type of thing, how much focus we could actually manage in a single moment. And yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff coming up. All right, I gotta get out of here though. I'm so sorry, Dharmadam. I didn't read any of this stuff, and I really should have. I'll keep it here just in case this topic comes up again. Yeah, peace as well. Good to see you as well. I hope you have a, you know, I'll probably see you again, but I hope you have a good new year. All good. Happy New Year. Onion helmet as well. Take care. That's my main technique, by the way. What I just had on screen was that the Burmese meditation. Oh, Vipassana. Burma style. Nice. Okay. Yeah, no, like there's nothing, I probably was ambiguous with my own arguments there, but I hope I didn't make it seem like any of these ways of meditating are incorrect in some way. I'm really only trying to defend the notion of asserting things about the world, um, and what that might imply. All right. We gotta get out of here. Have a good rest of the day. Enjoy the ball drop for anyone that hasn't already seen it. See you later.